Welcome everyone to our next Renko webinar, how to declutter Microsoft 365 for good. Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Matthias Einig, I'm CEO of Renko, and with me is Björn Erkens, who is the product owner for governance. Björn, what is declutter? Tell me about it. You need to unmute. Unmute yourself, sorry. Sorry about that, typical Teams problem.
And here we go.
Here we go. Hey, Björn. Sorry, that was a rough start.
No worries.
Okay.
I think probably the audience is used to that. You're on mute, you're on mute. I think we tell this everyone in our meetings on a daily basis, right? So that's good.
All right.
All right, so yeah, a warm welcome from myself to you guys in our audience as well. So let us get started. What is declutter? So a quick definition. Declutter means to remove things you do not need from a place in order to make it more pleasant and more useful. And while probably 90% of you guys think that this stems from Marie Kondo, it actually comes from the Cambridge Dictionary. All right, so what did we do? We did a quick poll on LinkedIn to ask what Microsoft 365 services need to be decluttered the most. And unsurprisingly, a lot of the participants answered to us Teams. Why is that? Probably because of COVID. Everyone wants to work from home or needs to work from home. And then Teams is followed by SharePoint, unused sites, flows, and then some people stated some other things. And what are unneeded resources in Microsoft 365? So when we are looking at unneeded resources, we have obviously different things for different Microsoft 365 services. So for example, what we hear a lot from customers that we are talking to is Teams for projects that are done, right? So Teams get set up for projects. When these projects are done, no one actually needs to use these Teams anymore. So they need or should be kind of recycled. Then we have the good old unused SharePoint sites. We have expired groups. We have unused files. We have unused flows and Power Apps because people might leave the organization. Or we have unused licenses that people find out, hey, we have some licenses here that are not used anymore. We should need to assign them to certain folks here at our organization. Some real-world examples we gathered from our calls that we have on a regular basis with customers or people that we talk to. So one German customer I was chatting to the last week actually told me that they have a process in place that they create a team for every job interview that they are doing. And then, yeah, they somehow forgot to clean that up. So now they are facing a lot of different teams that are unused that were created for these job interviews, and now they want to retire them. Another thing, like I mentioned in the previous slide, unused sites for of finished projects. Projects get finalized, and then what do we do with these sites? We need to detect them, and then we need to have a plan in place and what we want to do with them. Flows that have been built but are no longer serving a purpose. I think what everyone faces when they roll out Flow Power Automate as a new service, that they give the access or allow certain users to play around with flows, and then people start playing around. They build something and they try something out, and then all of a sudden you have a lot of things living in your environment that actually no one needs. So you want to clean them out as well. Another example, Power Apps left behind by employees who left the company. So I mean, if you are working for organization maybe of a bigger size, you have a lot of people joining and leaving the company, so you need to stay on top of kind of, yeah, what kind of resources do these employees that leave your company leave behind, and what do you do with them? And then licenses may be assigned to users that don't use them, and where do we see that certain users have certain types of licenses, maybe they don't make the use of the functionality, and we can, yeah, take that license away and give them another license that they actually make use of. So what is the negative impact from all of these topics, or all of this kind of declutter lifecycle management topic? What is the negative impact on your organization? I mean, eventually it all comes down to costs, right? So we have the cost aspect per se. So you want to have a look at unused licenses, where you don't make the maybe the full use of the license that the peoples are using, or where you maybe have licenses that are still assigned to disabled user accounts, which cost you money, and people just don't make use of it. So that's one thing. Adoption is another, right? So that's another topic you want to look at, right? So if people just create something and they don't actually use it then anymore, you should measure that and see if that is really, if the service really gets adopted that you are rolling out there. Productivity. So obviously, if you have a lot of unused or orphaned resources in your system, then it will be hard for people to find relevant stuff that they are searching for. So that's one other topic. Maintenance. You need somehow to maintain the system and maintain the resources that you have, and then compliance, which is maybe something with regards to that one example that I stated, where people are creating these Teams sites or these Teams channels for job interviews, where you maybe store confidential data in these teams, PII, these kind of things. So you maybe have some rules in place that you really need to clean them up at one point in time. Some more examples from our customers. So I was on a call with another customer the other week, and he then, while using our software, he found out, for example, that they were actually not using about 50% of their SharePoint sites. So 12,000 of 24,000 SharePoint sites were unused. Special customer, because they are in a certain line of business where they do projects, and then when the projects get finalized, the SharePoint site there can actually be retired. What does that mean? By finding out how many unused SharePoint sites they now have the ability to archive these sites in a blob storage, and that would help them then in the future to reduce storage costs. Another customer I talked to was finding out that they had over 250 users that had both E5 and E3 licenses, but actually only needed E3 licenses. So with that information, they could make the choice or the decision to bump these guys down to E3 and not make use of E5, and thus reducing licensing costs. Matt, maybe you take over to tell us a little bit about a mini research that we did about how orgs are really cleaning up, and if they have a cleanup process in place.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Björn. Yeah, we did a couple of polls over the last weeks, and I think probably some of you participating in this webinar also participated in those polls. So one was, in general, well, do you have a cleanup process for your unused resources? And well, not surprisingly, at the moment, the majority says no. So only a few, or only a third actually, are have discovered it as a problem and have implemented a process. And the next follow-up question to that was, so how does that cleanup process look like? And almost half of them actually say, okay, they do everything of that manually. 20% almost said, okay, they have some kind of PowerShell export and archiving process, so something custom built. Very few use a third-party tool. And well, 32% say, well, we'll just let it grow, so we don't care, or it's a problem for another day. I don't know exactly the reasons behind of it. So decluttering your services is also a problem. So not only the clutter is a problem, but also decluttering is a problem. Why? Because, well, your environment constantly evolves and constantly grows. Your business is not standing still. Your organization is constantly creating new resources, new sites, new teams, and so on. And it's basically a never-ending story. You always have to stay on top of it, and that makes it extremely hard, near to impossible to manage that manually, because, well, as you all know, manual labor does not scale easily, especially if it requires highly skilled personnel to do these kind of tasks, to identify what can be archived or removed. And then it's also very hard to identify relevant data and report on it. Yeah, what did we basically come up with, or what did we realize when we talked with a lot of organizations over the time, is a kind of governance maturity model. So it has basically three angles: reporting on the data, reporting on your clutter in your environment, resolving those findings that you make, and then of course also covering as many services as you want. And the majority is in the first stage basically doing everything manually, finding it out manual, resolving it manual, and maybe only covering the few most important services. The next level would be to do that on a repeatable basis, so have some kind of automation ready, at least for reporting, so that you know every week, every month you review, okay, which unused resources do we have, and then manually remove them. Next step would be to do it automated, so also resolve the issues in an automated manner, but still only for a few services. And the last stage would be to have it fully scalable for all services, automated discovery, reporting, and resolution. So that is what we call the cloud governance maturity model. So to give you some examples, how have we learned that organizations are working? So for maturity level 1, well, that is means basically extracting the information that you need from the admin centers. And probably many of you who are administrating Microsoft 365 now know that there are plenty of admin centers. If you go to that link at the bottom, you will come to that page that you see on the right. And these are all Microsoft admin centers that are currently known of. And Microsoft is constantly changing that, adding new ones, removing some. And yeah, the problem is, of course, to do all that manually, you often do not have exactly the data that you need accessible, or cannot store a view filtered on the information that you want to see. So you have to redo it every time. And well, you still have to resolve, of course, what you find manually. So this is extremely time consuming and not easily repeatable. An example for the second level is using PowerShell. Administrators often really love using PowerShell for many reasons, because it gives you a lot of power very quickly to achieve a result. And PowerShell is the go-to script language for administrators usually. So with PowerShell, you can retrieve from Office 365 basically all the information that you want. You have to write that script, of course, and usually you generate, for example, a CSV file. So you can automate at least the part to get the data that you're looking for and report on that. But those scripts need to be maintained. Microsoft is constantly changing APIs, adding stuff, removing stuff, remaining stuff. And of course, the services are constantly changing also, and you need to create it for every service and maintain it. Also, the data is not actionable directly in an automated manner, so you have to do that still manually. That does not scale. A level further is, for example, what we've heard from customers using Power Automate and Azure Automation. So basically creating also flows and Azure Runbox for the resolution part of the process. So identifying specific violations or specific problems of cluttered data, and then enrolling them in a flow or in a runbook to resolve them automated. It's still a do-it-yourself solution like PowerShell. So the same problems apply here too. The APIs that you're using change too quickly and often by Microsoft. It needs to be maintained, of course, and that brings the problem that the expert, whoever built that, kind of could also leave the company. And as we all know, custom built solutions are rarely documented well because, well, developers like to build stuff and not document the stuff that they build. That is, of course, the less exciting part of that process. So when the person leaves the company, then you might be stuck with a solution that maybe runs but cannot easily be maintained, or your external supplier that has built the solution might be no longer available. So that complicates things. And it may require also for richer automations, premium licenses of Power Automate. So it introduces an additional cost factor on top of the cost factor of building and maintaining. A response that I got on a conversation that I had on LinkedIn was of some one person like, okay, they're doing a POC with Power Automate, and I really love the response of somebody else to it. Welcome to release hell. Well, that is actually, well, the case if you ever build custom software in an organization. I've been a consultant myself, I think 15 years ago or so, and also build custom solutions there. Yeah, it's always tough to manage all of that. Well, so we learned about that, but there are also built-in solutions, of course. So for example, I got also response, many use group expiration policies in Azure Active Directory, which is good because it's maintained by Microsoft, so not a do-it-yourself solution. But it's quite limited, so it only covers groups. It doesn't cover files, teams, licenses, sites, and anything else that you might be interested. So it limits you only to a specific problem and cannot be expanded to everything else. It's focused mostly on automatic deletion and archiving. So if you want to involve end users, let's say in a multi-stage approval process to do something with the resource, that is hard or impossible to achieve with Azure Automation, Azure Active Directory group policies, and it requires an Azure AD Premium license. So again, introduces additional costs. So that brings us to level 4. The solution that we came up with, Renko Governance, is basically aiming to address this entire challenge. So not just declutter, in general, all governance challenges that we have learned from many interviews that we made with our customers over the last 2 years. And declutter is one of the most common use cases. So what we have built in Renko Governance, and we will show you that briefly in a demo after this slide, is that we basically have built a platform that allows you to implement your business policies, your governance policies, your governance reports, and also your automations in a very easy manner, in a visual builder, basically. So you do not require developer skills, you do not need to know the APIs, you do not need to worry about authentication to your services, have a service account, or to access the data. So we are abstracting that for you. And of course, we bring also plenty of templates with it so that you're not starting from scratch, but can actually start from the most common cases that we have learned from our customers. And we're constantly building new ones as well, together with our partners who share them with us or among those their customers, to basically apply the governance policies that are on the one hand maybe a generic problem, but always have a very specific solution in each organization. So you might find unused sites, but in one organization, you want to archive them. In the other organization, there you want to delete them, or you have a litigation hold for the data in there, needs to be stored in a different system, and so on. So the problem itself is the same that needs to be solved, but the solution might differ, for example. One key aspect of Renko Governance is that it's one platform to govern all your M365 service. So you should not, it's not necessary to jump into various admin centers or do everything manually yourself. And it's eventually maintained and updated by us. So we stay on top of the API changes by Microsoft, new services added, new requirements, reports, and so on. And then you can either use it as a software as a service, or if you want to run it on your own, you could also host it yourself in your own Azure subscription. So without further ado, I hand over to Björn again to let him show you a little bit how Renko Governance actually looks and works like in regards of the declutter use case.
All right, thanks, Matt. So Matt just said one of the underlying problems with governance currently is that you use a lot of different Microsoft services, and what we try to aim for is to aggregate all of these different Microsoft services in our platform so that you can govern from one place, right? So what we currently can govern for you is Power Automate, Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, Microsoft 365 groups, Power Apps, and Azure AD. And now, as we go along, other services will be added. So Exchange Online is high on the list for the next months, and then we just go and add more services during the year. So the kind of idea is that by the end of the year, we have a very good coverage of Microsoft 365 services. We have different things that I would like to point out in Renko Governance. The centerpiece of the tool is checks and automations. What are checks? In our language, checks are the governance rules that you apply within Renko Governance to monitor and stay on top of governance within your tenant. If I click Add Check here, this brings us to our checks template library, in which we have a lot of different governance rules as templates pre-built out for you to give you kind of a quick start to this whole topic. Today we are talking about declutter, why we have a lot of different use cases like costs, adoption, external access, and so on. Let's concentrate today on declutter. So if I filter for declutter in my checks template library, I now see what templates we have built for you. For example, groups with disabled user accounts, teams with disabled owner accounts, teams without owners, flows without owners, unused flows, unused SharePoint sites, and so on and so on. And as I mentioned, these templates give you a quick start to set up these rules. So you might go into Renko Governance, you give it a look, what kind of templates we offer you, and then you decide, okay, this is something that I want to make use of. So for example, I take the teams without owners check template, and I want that to set this up for my tenant. So when I click this, I now come into our check builder, which is currently then pre-populated logically because I come out of this template. So report the violation for every team that has no owner, right? And so now you can either say, yep, that template works as is, that's the rule I'm after, or you can, which is very important to us, be flexible and customize each and every rule to your own needs, because no organization is alike and you might have your own ideas, right? So you can add filters, for example, to this primary object team. Maybe I want to look at this and that, right? So I want to do some filtering here on this primary object. Or you can add filters to the secondary object. I want to only look at company or country or department X. So you can really make this your own, this logic for this rule that you're defining. If you're happy with that, then you give it a title, you give it a description, you categorize it, maybe you give it a severity. This rule is really important for me, so high severity, or less important, maybe informational. Once you get a template live or a rule live that you customized, as we are running a constant, continuous scan over your tenant, when we detect a violation to this rule, we bring this back to you and then let you do something with it. I will talk about this in a second. So let's come back to my declutter templates. You could say now, okay, I'm looking at all of these templates. They are great, but I have some own ideas about declutter rules that I want to implement. No problem. You always have create custom check if you want to start from scratch. So if I click this, then this brings us to our empty check builder, and now I can just start from scratch. Maybe I want to report a violation for every team with the filter XY, and so I now build out my logic for my governance rule here from scratch, as I just said. All right, so what happens if I now have defined and configured certain checks? We are now looking at our checks overview page, in which I see, all right, these are maybe the checks I have now configured, and now I see I have violations to these checks. So these are kind of the violations to the rules that I have defined. And now I have two ways of dealing with these violations. One would be a manual approach, and the second would be an automated approach. Obviously, the bigger your organization is, the more violations you will have to the rules that you define, right? Because you have your users, you want to let them work freely, so they will do a lot of stuff and they will break your governance plan or your governance rules. And that's okay, because we want to give you the means to kind of deal with that. But you might see a lot of violations. So manually working on resolving violations maybe can be a little tough, right? So anyhow, let's have a quick look at how the manual approach would look like. So let's pick this declutter template, groups with disabled user accounts. If I click this, now I see I have 31 total violations, and underneath this view I see the objects that have violated my rule. So I here have the display name. I can always toggle this information on, and then I see here for this rule, groups with disabled user accounts, that I have Bianca and Adele, which have disabled user accounts, for example. I have always the possibility also to look into the teams that, or to look into the objects that have violated my rule. So if I click this, this now brings me to our inventory view, in which I get kind of the data sheet of that object that has violated my rule. So under related objects here, I see this certain Contoso team group has 18 members, 4 owners, and so on. And I can always expand this view to get this information so that you exactly don't have to go to different sites to get that information, but you have the whole data, properties, related objects on one page, and can download this as PDF or Excel to because maybe you want to discuss this internally to make a decision. All right, so I said this is the manual approach. That's more like looking into things and then making a decision. But as I mentioned, the manual approach could be potentially hard when you have a lot of users in your system. So sticking with this example of groups with disabled user accounts, for every check that you bring into the system, you can add an automation. And that means that now through the automation bit, you are able to define sequences or workflow that should be triggered if that check is violated, right? So you maybe have a check, what we just saw, groups with disabled user accounts, and now you want to trigger a certain action. And now you can build this workflow out in our automation, meaning you could either send emails, send Teams notifications to people, gather input from people asking them, hey, what is happening here? What do we need to do? Or something like this for certain cases. You could archive, you could delete, you could assign new owners, you could kick out users out of a certain site collection or something like this. So you can take all kind of actions and build out these sequences with us, and everything is maintained by us. So you can just kind of use our visual builder to bring this together. You don't need to have any coding knowledge or anything. So that's what you can do with the automation bit here. Finally, dashboards. So we talked about checks and automation, checks being the governance rules that you define. And then as we are running a continuous scan over your tenant, we bring back the violations, and then you decide if you want to resolve these violations in an automated way with a sequence, or in a manual way by just looking at the data and discussing it internally. Now we are talking about dashboards. Dashboards is our help to you to do reporting in an easy way. So you might want to build out reports for management or for different stakeholders, for different business units. And what we do for you is we set you up with a couple of dashboards out of the box. So for example, as we're talking about declutter today, we have our declutter dashboard in which you find relevant data about certain things that you might be interested in. So show me, for example, flows without runs here, or show me flows without owners or teams with disabled owner accounts. And from here you can then, if we find something for you, always go to the check and get the data behind it. So which are the teams with the disabled owner accounts? And then explore from there and make decisions. And also, obviously, if we stick with that example, decide if you want to, maybe let me just do this, teams with a disabled owner account. Okay, 4 violations in total found. Let me check this out. I go to the check. I now see the teams with this disabled owner accounts. Okay, these are the teams. And now I could obviously also for the future add an automation to this check or governance rule that you might be interested in to automatically resolve these things. You can, for the dashboards that we build you can configure tiles in the end. So if you want to customize them to your needs, or you can remove them entirely to these from this dashboard, you can add more dashboard tiles that you are able to build within Renko Governance to that dashboard as well. The way it works, if you are happy with a dashboard, or you have added some tiles, or you created an own dashboard from scratch, the way it works, if you want to share this then with your stakeholders, is on each dashboard, you just click these 3 dots, you say share this dashboard, and then you decide if you want to share this information as a one-time email or as a recurring email. Meaning here I could say, hey, I want to deliver this information with the up-to-date data maybe on a weekly basis in this and that time zone at this time to these folks. They don't need to be part of Renko Governance. They can be outside. Then they get a link, need to authenticate, and then they come to a URL in which they see only their dashboard and the data behind it. Then they can download certain information from there as PDF and so on. So that's what we are doing here for you. So that was the quick overview of how we can help with Renko Governance. One more thing, Renko Governance is totally free for 30 days. Full version, you can just play around. You always get the demo data that I use to play around if you want to have a quick glance before maybe connecting your own test tenant or production environment, and then you can play around for 30 days on your production environment, build some checks, build some dashboards, just give it a spin, and then just see what it can do for you. At this point, Matt, do you want to add something, or should we go into the questions and answer section here at the end of our presentation today?
So we can go into the Q&A right away. I just wanted to summarize it that way. So again, what are we aiming for? If you really want to govern your environment, I think everybody who is in that kind of role to be responsible for that has realized by now that it's an impossible fight to do manually. You will never have enough resources, enough time to actually do that manually. So I think the question that you need to automate it is not really there for anyone. The question is just how do you automate it and how far can you go? And that's what we basically want to achieve with Renko Governance, to go to the very end of the possibilities. In the best case, that you set up your policies, that you set up your automations that might involve your end users to approve things, let's say through a Power Automate flow or through built-in automation actions within Renko Governance. And and then the policy that you have set up more or less runs on its own, and you just report on it, so that it scales with the growth of your organization and does not require you to constantly do the same tasks over and over again. So I'm going through the questions. Thank you very much for everyone who has submitted some. So the first question is from VJ. How about unused app keys of the Graph API? So we've heard that before as well, and this is on the roadmap, but currently not top priority. So app keys or applications in general registered in the Graph are also available via the Graph API, which we use in order to retrieve the data. So that will certainly come in the future, that we also list applications that have been registered to the Graph, and where you can see, okay, well, have they been used and so on, depending on the information that Microsoft provides us through the API. So that is, of course, our limitation. We cannot retrieve data that isn't there. The second question that we have from Matthew was, we have a lot of SharePoint sites, teams created and manually created, that all fall under an org-wide retention policy. So we are unable to delete them. Can Renko help with that? So obviously, when there is a retention policy in place in the organization, then we will also not be able to delete those sites. We can not overrule what is set up within Microsoft itself. So we can help with the process of reporting and managing those archived sites, but we cannot remove them from the retention. Next question from Robert, unused Azure resources runbox. So our goal is in the long run to expand Renko Governance outside of pure M365 towards also Azure. So we are planning to add also Azure resources that you can report on Azure VMs, on Azure networks, on runbooks, and so on and so on. So we will constantly build that up. Renko Governance, as we mentioned at the beginning, is a platform, so it is actually pluggable, so we can plug in additional integrations into Renko Governance that then can all benefit of the features of the platform. So reporting, dashboards, inventory, and the connections between the different types, the checks and the automations. So it's on the roadmap, but probably not this year. From Ove, any suggestions regarding the use of Microsoft 365 group expiration policy when you have teams groups that can't be included in the policy in regard of the policy limit of 500? Unfortunately, no. So with the limit is nothing that we can lift, and the only thing is, okay, you could implement such a policy within Renko Governance, of course, but that doesn't help you with your problem if you're using the group expiration policies with directly from Microsoft, unfortunately. Someone asked, okay, we have the need to bring in governance into Power Automate. The Power Automate or Power Platform Center of Excellence framework is nice, but only a starting point. Yeah, we hear that a lot. A real life issue is, for example, a flow processed some data on Monday 5 a.m. Which one was it? Sometimes hard to find and keep track of the inventory. So yeah, we have, of course, also reviewed the COE, and we hear also our customers about the Center of Excellence, which is also quite cumbersome to set up and run and then actually maintain. You can also not easily adjust it to your needs. So in Renko Governance, yes, you can actually also track all flow runs and even beyond the 28-day limit of Power Automate. So Microsoft themselves are actually only tracking the last 28 days of the runs of a flow, and we keep an indefinite history unless you configure it the way that you do not want to keep that history. Similar for other data, audit logs, and so on, we can keep an indefinite history of all that data unless you tell us otherwise. saying that, yeah, we can actually identify which flow ran at a specific time, and at the moment not yet, but in the future we will also analyze the flows themselves to identify which resources they have touched, so that you get that connection out of it. Next question from Robert. Is something popular like Nimtex Workflow on the list too? Yeah, we heard that also. At the moment, the popularity depends very much on the organization that you talk to. Of course, the ones that use Nimtex workflows are interested in it. And we have, for another product that we have actually already implemented, the ability to discover Nimtex workflows and report on that. But it's currently not part of Renko Governance and not in the top priority list at the moment. But of course, you can always go to our user voice page and yeah, vote on that, which will influence also the prioritization of what we add next. John is asking, how flexible can we be with what is defined as unused? What flags are used in that policy? Can it include last access, last read, rather than last modified? So in general, you can use any property that is available through Microsoft's Graph API that we retrieve. So which kind of answers also the question. So last read and last access is not an information that is retrievable at the moment. If it is retrievable through the Graph API, then we would also add it to the properties of a file object, and then you can build your checks on top of that, and eventually the reports as well. Going on. David is asking, would it be possible to trigger when somebody adds a user to the owners group in an SP Online site? Yes, that would be possible. So you would build a check basically with a condition saying, okay, give me all SharePoint or give me all users that are member or are owner of the SharePoint site and have been added in the last 5 days, for example, or in the last day. And based on that, we would discover only those users that are owners added in that time frame and trigger, for example, an automation on that, for example, to inform somebody else, say somebody has been added as an owner. As the automation is only triggered once when the violation of the check is discovered the first time, usually. That means the time frame is actually not that relevant if you say 1 day or 7 days or 1 month. As soon as somebody has been added, it will report it as a violation and then of the check, and then you can trigger that automation. Next question from Matthew. Does the automation trigger retrospectively for violations that happened already rather than in the future? So yes, you can do that as well. You can also manually trigger automations for data that we retrieve, for example, on the first scan, because of course we can only retrieve the changes that have happened since you connected your tenant. So we draw a baseline on the first scan and of course take the historic data that is available through the API, but you can then trigger, for example, automations on that data as well for historic data if you want.
Maybe to add there, it's like we have 3 different triggers. Check violation manually and on schedule. On schedule meaning, for example, that you say every Monday, once a time in the month, I want to run an automation for this and that.
So it's quite similar to what you see also in Power Automate. So you can do ad hoc automations, you can manual triggered, you can create some that are triggered based on a check, so a violation of a check, and as Björn said, also on a schedule. So for example, if you do monthly audit reviews and want to send a report every month to the owner of a team to review the external users, then you can trigger that on a scheduled automation for everyone who is matching I am an owner of a team. All right, questions are still coming in. I'll try to go through them one by one. Could you show the automation by example? I understood no coding is required. So how would PowerShell scripts be created within automation? So our automation solution is not creating PowerShell scripts. It is a built-in automation engine that allows you to add actions that are either built-in actions or trigger external actions. So an internal action could be, for example, send an email or send an adaptive card to a team, or gather feedback from a user that is connected to the resource, or delete the resource, archive the resource, depending on what permissions you're giving. So you can give granular permissions on what you allow Renko Governance to do or not.
I can show this in a one-on-one. Probably that's the best. If you want us to, I can reach out in the end to the person that was asking that question. Then maybe I can just show them in a one-on-one call.
Good, yeah. And I just wanted to add, and if you want to trigger something more complex that is not part of Renko Governance because it's a very complex use case, well, then you can trigger, for example, your own external webhook, you can trigger your own Azure function, you can trigger your own Power Automate flow, you can trigger your own Azure Logic App, and there you have full flexibility to build whatever you want, and you can use our API to retrieve the data regarding the violation that triggered your automation or your external implementation. Hope that answers the question. Where is the underlying data stored? No, is it Dataverse? No, there's nothing stored in Dataverse. Everything is in Azure. It's a self-contained Azure environment for each customer or each workspace eventually. So we have the concept of workspace and environments. So you can have, for example, also production and a dev environment in the same workspace. And everything is stored in Azure Table Storage, so we don't use any SQL databases or anything. Everything is table storage, encrypted at rest and in transit, actually double encrypted at rest and in transit. Yeah, no data worse involved. How does licensing for Renko Governance look like? Licensing is a subscription licensing, so it's a SaaS. No matter, so if you choose that we host it as a SaaS, normal software as a service, license per users, and we license based on Microsoft 365 users that have a Microsoft license. So that means it excludes external users, and excludes disabled accounts and so on. So every user that has an active Microsoft 365 license will be counted as a to be licensed users, and it's a scaled license scheme. The pricing is on the web page. Also, when you sign up and connect your tenant, you will see the normal pricing directly in our licensing portal.
Just to add one thing here. Just to add one thing here, we don't have different plans. We only have one plan, so it's you pay and get every functionality that you see. So there are no different plans.
Yeah, so no tiers. Single tier. The only differentiation that we have is Renko hosted or self-hosted. So if you decide, yeah, I like the solution, but for whatever reasons we cannot have a SaaS connect to our Office 365 tenant, then there's also the option to host the entire solution in your own self-contained Azure subscription, which is of course a little bit more effort because we have no access to maintain it. So you need to update it. We need to have to support you, so that it requires some installation and onboarding. efforts, of course, and but apart from that, then it runs exactly the same. If you are, of course, in, let's say, for example, a GCC tenant or GCC high, then the limitations of the data that we can gather are depending on what's available in these kind of environments. So as GCC and GCC high are usually behind in the APIs and what has been rolled out. So we can, of course, only retrieve what we can get or where we can access to. Let's see. How does the trial version work? Is it like an SPFX solution? No, it's not. Has nothing to do with SharePoint. It is an entire separate solution hosted on Azure. You go to app.renko.com and then just start your trial, and you decide when you're ready to connect your tenant or a test tenant, or if you just want to play around with it with demo data. Matthew is asking, I'm seeing a check classic sites, shows classic SharePoint sites, but looking at the detail, these are M365 groups created for planners, for example. What is the governance concern with classic sites? What should we be doing differently? Classic sites is just a concern for some organizations because it prevents them basically in regards of adoption of all the modern functionality in modern SharePoint sites. So it's not necessarily a problem per se, but there's usually a reason why sites are still classic and haven't been upgraded. Usually the case is that there are customizations on those classic sites that would need to be updated as well and prevent the conversion to a modern site. So there is, and we identify the classic sites basically by the used site template at the moment. Another question, there are 600 flows under a service account created and we have a given unique name for each. Is there a way to search and get the exact flow URL instead of clicking show more option? So in Power Automate, I don't think so. In Renko Governance, well, this is just data that we gather, so also the flow URLs are part of that. So if you want to give it a try, just connect Renko Governance in the trial to your environment and export the flows, the list of flows in a CSV, and then you have all the URLs. Can we use DKE for the data encryption of the governance solution? So at the moment, not yet, but that is planned. All the keys that we use are stored in Azure Key Vault. And let me just check something up. You cannot bring your own key at the moment. That is something that is worked on, and double key encryption. To be honest, I have to get back to you on that to ask our tech guys if this is something that we already currently support. So Anonymous, who wrote that question, if you could kindly reach out to us, just write an email to support@renko.com and ask your question and we can get back to you. All right. Robert is asking, no, he's actually giving us kudos. So thank you very much, Robert. Happy to see that you like it. So John, final question, also one that we get a lot. John is asking, have you seen any performance issues with really large tenant? That depends very much on the data that you're retrieving. So the data that we retrieve through the Graph API is usually doesn't have any noticeable performance impact. It takes sometimes a while, maybe with a lot of data, it can take a couple of hours to retrieve that. Where we see a performance impact is especially SharePoint data, because SharePoint does not provide the information that we need and want to report on through the API. So SharePoint is actually crawled. And the crawling falls under the throttling limits of Microsoft. So if we push too heavy, then we would get throttled. So we need to be always below the threshold not to getting throttled. So that result is that it might take for larger tenant longer to retrieve that data, but eventually the data will be retrieved. So to give you a little bit of an example, one recent customer that we had that has about I think 30,000 SharePoint sites roughly, and that took about 1.5 to 2 days to get through it entirely. But this is only the initial scan, and from then on we do an incremental scan where we only look at the modified data. So the subsequent scans are much faster, and we do then a full scan every month or two to just create a new baseline. So with other services that hasn't been an issue. And as soon as the SharePoint product group decides to actually also provide the necessary APIs, then we would switch that and hopefully speed things up even further. So let's 3 more questions. Krishna is asking to work with the solution. Do I need to provide my tenant URL? No, you do not. You can, as long as you do not want to connect your tenant to actually scan it, you can do that entirely anonymously. You do not even have to log in with your Microsoft accounts. We also allow you, we separate basically your personal account with which you log into Renko Governance from the accounts that you connect to a tenant. So you can log in with your Gmail address, create a trial with a Gmail address, and play around with the demo data. Until you want to really see your own data, then of course it is advised that you also use a properly secured Microsoft account with 2FA and so on, and then connect to your tenant. And we even separate also giving consent to the individual services, so you can either consent to all services at once and can also delegate it to an admin if you do not have the privileges yourself. But in larger organizations especially, we have encountered that they want have their admin centers also separated among multiple people, maybe also depending on location for specific areas of their services are managed by different people. Then you can also configure Renko Governance in a way that you, for example, ask one person for SharePoint admin consent, another person for Teams, a third one for Power Platform. And we use everywhere application permissions apart from Power Platform, where this is currently not possible. So you do not require a service account to do that. And we use at the moment entirely only read-only permissions. So at the moment, in order to gather data and to basically do everything regarding dashboards, analyzing your data in the inventory, creating your tags, and also automations that do not change anything. You do not have to give us any write permissions. This can be all done with read-only. Only when you want to build also automations that require changing data in your tenant, then you would need to consent to that separately. And then questions are still coming in. So can we expect privacy of our data when working with the trial version? Yes, you can, of course. There's also an extensive article in our knowledge base, which is linked on the pricing FAQs at the bottom, if you want to find it, which describes how your data is secured at Renko. We do not have the ability to access your data at all. As said, it's double encrypted. So not only encrypted by default by Azure, but we apply an additional customer-specific encryption key ourselves to the data before it's stored and before it's retrieved. We also cannot gain access to any workspaces unless you show it to us in a screen sharing. So this is entirely separated. And if you still are concerned, well, then there's always the option that you can host the entire thing in a lockdown Azure subscription yourself. So there's no dialing home or anything that might need to concern you, which we are also very transparent that this is, you can check that on that, of course. Let's see, last question, I believe. Can we mark a violation as a false positive? At the moment, not. No. So the violation is basically discovered based on the rule and filter set that you have set up. So if it is matching that rule that you have set up, it's by default positive for that match. I understand the use case that you might want to exclude, for example, a specific finding. Okay, we do not want this one to be automated, for example, in the future on a recurring automation. That is a use case that we're aware of. Currently, not something that we're implementing in any near future, but again, also something that you can vote on in user voice, submit and vote there if that is an important task, and we would reach out to you to understand better what your concern or requirement behind of that is. All right, I believe that was it. I hope I answered every question. If not, or if you still have some follow-up questions, we're happy, of course, to jump on a call with you. Just go on the website, open up the chat, or send us a contact request. And we'll set up a call with Björn, for example, if you want, and he will walk you through, explain to you your how we can help you with our solution, and then you can give it a spin yourself. Thank you very much. We are exactly at the end of the webinar. Thanks for all your questions. This is also really helpful for us because, well, we see and we learn a lot every time new, and the entire product is built on customer analysis and learning. So this is basically what we are aiming to, solving the real problems of the customers. So everything that you can share with us is basically improving the product in the future. With that, I leave you to your afternoon, evening, or whatever time it is where you are. Thank you very much for joining us. We will have more webinars like that for specific use cases coming up in the next months. So happy to see you again. And yeah.
And maybe a final note, the next webinar that comes up is actually with a partner of us who runs you through some real life use cases that he has experienced with some of his customers using Renko Governance. So feel free to join us for the next one, which will be in next month then.
Which is a good final point. So if you are a consultant or a partner, the entire solution is also built to support partners in their business, basically helping them to help their customers implement governance and also in a repeated manner. So it is possible in the solution to export every configuration that you have and import it, for example, in a different environment so that you do not have to build everything from scratch yourself. So if that is something you're interested as an MSP or an SI in that Microsoft space, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to talk to you and see how we can help you build up a business around governance for your customers. Thank you very much, everyone. Now that's it, 2 minutes over time. Hope to see you trying it out, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.